Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that might make some folks blush, but honestly, it's about time we had an open and honest conversation about it.
Absolutely. It's more common than many people realize.
Exactly. We're talking about masturbation, specifically its role as self-care.
That's right.
And to guide us through this deep dive, we'll be looking at a podcast episode titled Masturbation as Self-Care, exploring benefits, myths, and social perspectives from a show called The Wellness Hour.
Great episode.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting? The research actually suggests that masturbation is a universal behavior.
Really?
Yeah, across cultures, age groups, and sexual orientations.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's more common than you might think, right?
It really is, and yet it's often surrounded by so much secrecy and shame.
Yeah, it's like this weird disconnect. It's so common, but we're still whispering about it in the dark ages, you know?
It's true, and I think a lot of that stems from societal norms and the way we've been conditioned to view sexuality.
That makes sense. There's definitely a lot of baggage that comes with this topic.
Especially for women, there seems to be even more stigma attached to it.
You're right. Like, it's more acceptable for men to talk about it or even joke about it. But for women, it's still very much taboo.
Right, and the research even shows that men are more likely to report masturbating and potentially doing so more frequently.
Interesting.
But that doesn't mean women aren't exploring this aspect of self-care too. It just might not be discussed as openly.
So we've got this universal behavior that could potentially have some benefits, but it's wrapped up in all this secrecy and shame and different expectations for men and women. Where do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Well, I think a good place to start is by looking at the benefits. Let's focus on the positive stuff.
Okay, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? What kind of benefits does masturbation have?
Well, did you know that masturbation can actually help relieve stress?
Wait, really? I thought stress relief was more like, bubble baths and meditation and stuff.
Those are great too, but it's all about those amazing hormones that your body releases during masturbation, like endorphins and oxytocin.
Okay, so it's like a chemical thing, like those hormones actually have a calming effect.
Exactly. Endorphins are your body's natural painkillers. They give you that runner's high feeling, and they combat stress.
So it's like a runner's high without the running.
Precisely. And then you've got oxytocin, which is often called the cuddle hormone because it promotes feelings of relaxation, bonding, and connection.
Wow, so it's not just a physical release, it's like a whole emotional and chemical cascade happening in your body.
That's exactly right.
I can definitely see how that would lead to feeling more relaxed and maybe even sleepy afterward.
You got it. And that sleepiness is thanks to another hormone called prolactin, which gets released after orgasm.
So it's like a triple whammy: stress relief, relaxation, and then better sleep.
Pretty amazing, right? And there are even more benefits to consider.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. What else is there?
Well, for women, masturbation can actually strengthen pelvic muscles, which can help with overall pelvic health.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and it might even help ease menstrual cramps for some women.
That's incredible. So it's not just about pleasure. It actually has these tangible physical benefits, too.
Exactly. And for men, there's a possible link between regular ejaculation and prostate health, although more research is needed in this area.
Wow. So it really does cover a lot of bases, physically speaking.
It does. And let's not forget about the mental and emotional benefits.
Oh, right. We haven't even touched on those yet. Fill me in. What are we talking about there?
Well, masturbation can be an amazing tool for self-exploration and getting to know your own body and what feels good.
That makes sense.
Understanding your own body and your own pleasure is such an important part of sexual health and well-being.
Absolutely. And I imagine that can lead to feeling more confident, too, right?
It definitely can. That increased self-awareness and confidence can translate into other areas of life as well.
And what about mood? Does masturbation have any impact on that?
You bet. Remember dopamine, that feel-good hormone? Well, it gets released in droves during orgasm.
Oh, yeah. Dopamine, the brain's reward system.
Exactly. You get that rush of dopamine, which contributes to feelings of pleasure and happiness. It's like that feeling of accomplishment you get after achieving a goal or after a great workout.
Okay, so it's like a double whammy of good feelings, stress relief, and then a mood boost on top of that.
Precisely.
Okay, color me intrigued.
Oh.
But with all these amazing benefits, why is it still such a taboo topic? I mean, if it's so good for us and so many people do it, why all the secrecy and shame?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's definitely a disconnect between the science and how society views it.
So what's keeping this taboo alive? What are some of the common myths and misconceptions that are fueling this stigma?
Oh, there are so many myths out there, it's almost comical. Like, have you ever heard the one about masturbation causing blindness?
Wait, seriously, people actually believe that?
You'd be surprised. But let me assure you, there is absolutely no scientific basis for that claim whatsoever.
Okay, good to know. I can keep my Netflix binges going without fear of going blind. What about the myth that it lowers fertility? I feel like I've heard that one whispered around too.
Ah, yes, another myth that needs to be debunked. In fact, some research suggests that for men, regular ejaculation might actually improve sperm quality, not lower it.
Wow, talk about getting things backwards. So not going blind, not impacting fertility. What other ridiculous misconceptions are out there?
Another big one is that it's only for single people, as if being in a relationship means you suddenly lose all interest in your own body and pleasure.
Right, like your relationship status dictates your needs.
It's such a limiting and frankly kind of silly idea.
Okay, so we've busted the blindness myth, the fertility myth, the single people only myth. What about the idea that it's just inherently unhealthy or immoral? I feel like that's a big one. That's where a lot of the shame comes from.
That's where things get a bit more complex, because that's often rooted in cultural and religious beliefs, which we can delve into later on. But from a purely physiological standpoint, masturbation is a perfectly normal and healthy activity for most people.
Okay, so we've busted some myths and established that it's generally a healthy and normal behavior with tons of potential benefits. But I'm still curious about the pleasure aspect. Like, what's the science behind that? Why does it feel so good?
To understand that, we need to take a peek into how the nervous and endocrine systems work together during masturbation.
Ooh, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Tell me more about how my brain is involved in all this.
Well, imagine this. Your brain has pleasure centers that light up like fireworks during orgasm.
How's fun?
And these pleasure centers get flooded with dopamine, which creates those feelings of euphoria and bliss. It's like your brain's reward system going into overdrive.
So it's a chemical reaction, but it feels like so much more than that.
It is, and it's not just dopamine. There's a whole symphony of hormones involved, each playing a role in creating that pleasurable experience.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are these other hormonal players and what do they do?
Well, we've got oxytocin, which we talked about earlier. It boosts feelings of relaxation and intimacy.
So it's not just a physical sensation, there's an emotional component too.
Exactly. And then there are endorphins, which act as natural painkillers and stress relievers, adding to that overall sense of well-being.
So it's like a feel-good cocktail of hormones all working together to create this incredible experience.
You could say that. And finally, we have prolactin, which promotes relaxation and sleepiness after the grand finale.
No wonder people often feel so relaxed and sleepy afterward. It's like the body's natural way of winding down after all that excitement.
Exactly.
So with all these amazing benefits and the science behind it, why does that taboo feeling still linger? It's such a paradox.
You're right, it is a paradox, and it speaks to the power of societal conditioning and how deeply ingrained those messages can be, even when they contradict our own experiences and scientific evidence.
So what are some of the key factors that are contributing to this lingering taboo, even in today's world?
I think one of the biggest factors is cultural norms. Many societies, especially those with strong religious influences, have historically associated sexuality with shame and guilt. And that stigma often gets attached to any form of sexual expression, even when it's with yourself.
So it's like this unspoken rule that pleasure is bad,
Yeah.
especially outside of a very specific context.
Right, and that can create a lot of internal conflict for people, especially when they're trying to reconcile their own experiences with those societal messages.
Absolutely. It's like you're constantly battling against these ingrained beliefs.
And those cultural norms are often intertwined with religious views, which adds another layer of complexity to the conversation.
Right. Okay, let's talk about that. How do different religious perspectives influence attitudes towards masturbation?
Well, it's important to remember that different religions have varying perspectives on this, and even within a single religion, there can be a wide range of interpretations.
That makes sense. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly. For example, Christianity encompasses a spectrum of views. Some denominations view masturbation as a sin, associating it with lust and lack of self-control.
Yeah, I've definitely encountered that perspective before.
It's a common one, but there are also Christian denominations that take a more nuanced approach, recognizing that it can be a natural part of human sexuality, particularly for unmarried individuals or those exploring their own bodies.
So there's room for individual interpretation, even within a single faith.
Right, and it's important to approach these conversations with that understanding, acknowledging that people's beliefs and experiences can vary widely.
Absolutely. So what about other religions? How do their views differ?
Well, Islam generally disapproves of masturbation, but there are some exceptions. For instance, it might be considered permissible in certain situations, like to prevent adultery or to alleviate intense sexual urges.
So there's some recognition of the biological realities at play there.
Right, and then you have Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism, which tend to have a more neutral stance. Some ancient texts even recognize sexual exploration as a natural part of life.
Interesting. It sounds like those cultures are a bit more open to discussing these topics.
They tend to be. And what about modern secular views? Have those shifted at all in recent years?
I feel like there's definitely been a shift toward more acceptance and openness, at least in certain circles.
Absolutely. There's a growing movement toward acceptance and education about masturbation as part of overall well-being.
Yeah, like the sex positive movement and all those amazing educators and therapists who are working to destigmatize these topics.
Exactly. They're doing fantastic work in helping people understand that it's okay to talk about these things and that pleasure is a natural part of life.
I love that it's like we're finally starting to break free from those old restrictive ways of thinking.
It's a slow process, but we're definitely moving in the right direction.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that while masturbation is generally healthy, there can be potential downsides if it becomes excessive or compulsive, right?
You're absolutely right. Moderation is key, just like with anything else in life.
So how do we find that balance? What are some signs that it might be time to take a step back and reevaluate our relationship with masturbation?
Well, if you're experiencing any physical discomfort, like irritation or soreness, that's definitely a sign to ease up a bit.
That makes sense. Listen to your body.
Exactly. And if you're feeling any emotional distress, like guilt or shame, that's also a red flag.
Because those feelings could be stemming from those internalized societal messages we were talking about earlier.
Precisely. And if masturbation starts to interfere with your daily life, like your work, your relationships, or your responsibilities, that's a sign that it might be time to seek professional help.
It's important to remember that there's no shame in seeking help. It's a sign of strength and self-awareness.
Absolutely. And a therapist can help you understand any underlying emotional or psychological factors that might be contributing to the compulsive behavior.
It's all about getting to the root of the issue and finding healthy coping mechanisms.
Right, and creating a more balanced and fulfilling life overall.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation so far. We've covered so much ground in this first part of our deep dive into masturbation as self-care, from the science behind it to the societal factors that influence how we view it.
It's been quite the journey, and we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
I know, I can't wait to dive deeper in the next part. We'll be back after a quick break to discuss some practical tips and strategies for incorporating masturbation into a healthy self-care routine, and we'll also talk about how to have those open and honest conversations about this often taboo topic.
It's going to be great. See you soon.
Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. We're diving deeper into the world of masturbation as self-care.
I'm ready for the practical stuff. We've talked about all the science and the myths, but how do we actually incorporate this into a healthy self-care routine?
That's a great question. Knowledge is power, but only when we can actually apply it, right?
Right. So where do we start?
I think a good starting point is creating a comfortable and safe space for yourself. Privacy and relaxation are key here.
Makes sense. It's hard to relax if you're worried about someone walking in or, your phone buzzing.
Exactly. So think about dimming the lights, maybe lighting some candles, putting on some calming music, whatever, helps you create a sanctuary where you can connect with your body without judgment.
I love that. Setting the mood for a positive experience.
It's all about creating that sense of peace and allowing yourself to fully let go.
And speaking of letting go, how do we get past those ingrained feelings of guilt or shame that some people might have around masturbation?
Yeah, those societal messages can run deep, and it can be a process to unlearn them.
It's like we were talking about earlier, all those myths and misconceptions that we need to debunk.
Exactly. Challenge those negative thoughts. Ask yourself, where are they coming from? Are they based on facts or fear?
It's about replacing those myths with knowledge and understanding.
Right. Remind yourself that you're not alone. Millions of people around the world engage in masturbation. It's normal, it's healthy, and it's a part of human sexuality.
I like that. It's about normalizing the experience and taking away the shame.
It is, and it's about giving yourself permission to explore your own body and your own pleasure without judgment.
But even with all the positivity, is there ever a point where it's too much of a good thing?
That's a great question. Like with any activity, moderation is key.
So how do we know if we've crossed that line? What are some signs that it might be becoming an issue?
Well, masturbation shouldn't be used as an escape from reality or a way to avoid dealing with difficult emotions.
So it's about checking in with yourself and making sure it's actually serving you as a form of self-care and not becoming something else entirely.
Right. Be mindful and make conscious choices that support your overall well-being.
And if you start to notice that it's becoming an obsession or it's interfering with your daily life, that's a sign that it might be time to seek professional help.
Absolutely. A therapist can help you understand any underlying emotional or psychological factors that might be contributing to the behavior.
Okay, so this is all great advice for individuals, but how do we start having more open and honest conversations about masturbation as a society, especially with younger generations?
That's such an important question. I think it starts with education. We need to break the cycle of silence and shame by providing accurate information.
Like comprehensive sex education in schools.
Exactly. We need to teach young people about their bodies, about pleasure, and about healthy sexuality in a way that's inclusive and non-judgmental.
I completely agree. Give them the tools and knowledge to make informed decisions about their own bodies and their own well-being.
And parents and caregivers have a huge role to play here too.
Oh yeah, those conversations can be tough.
Yeah.
Any advice for parents who are dreading that talk?
I think the most important thing is to create a safe and judgment-free environment where your child feels comfortable coming to you with anything. Build that trust.
So open communication, building trust, that's the foundation.
Right. And then you can gradually introduce age-appropriate information about sexuality, explain that masturbation is normal, healthy, nothing to be ashamed of.
And how do you handle those awkward questions that kids inevitably ask?
You stay calm and answer honestly. Don't shy away from their curiosity. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I'm not sure, but let's find out together.
I love that approach. It shows you're willing to be on this journey with them.
It's about being a resource for your child and letting them know that they can come to you with anything.
And what about the adults out there who are still struggling with those internalized messages of shame and guilt? What advice do you have for them?
I would say be kind to yourself,
Yeah.
challenge those negative thoughts, and remember that you deserve to experience pleasure and feel good in your own body.
It's about reclaiming your sexuality and defining it on your own terms.
Exactly. Don't let those outdated beliefs hold you back from experiencing joy and pleasure.
But what if those negative feelings are really persistent? Like, what if it's more than just a little guilt or shame?
If those feelings are overwhelming, seeking professional help can be incredibly valuable. A therapist can provide a safe and supportive space to explore those emotions and develop healthier coping mechanisms.
So it's about recognizing when you need a little extra support and not being afraid to ask for it.
Right, and there are so many amazing therapists out there who specialize in sexual health and well-being, so you don't have to go through this alone.
And the more we talk about these things openly and honestly, the less power those negative messages have.
Absolutely. It's all about breaking down those barriers and creating a more accepting and inclusive society for everyone.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the science of pleasure to the importance of open communication.
It's been quite a journey, and we're not done yet.
I know, I can't wait to wrap things up in part 3. We'll be back after a quick break to discuss some final takeaways and leave you with some food for thought. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into masturbation as self-care.
It's been a really insightful conversation so far.
It really has. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science behind it to the myths that surround it to the importance of open communication.
Lots to think about.
Definitely. So as we wrap things up, I wanted to touch on some key takeaways from our discussion today.
Sounds good.
First and foremost, I think it's important to remember that masturbation is a normal and natural behavior.
Absolutely. It's something that many people experience regardless of their age, gender, or relationship status.
Right, and there's absolutely no shame in it.
None at all. In fact, it can have a lot of potential benefits for both our physical and mental well-being.
It's like we've been saying, it's a form of self-care.
Exactly. It's about taking care of yourself, both physically and emotionally.
And those benefits we talked about earlier, like stress relief, better sleep, mood boost, those are pretty compelling reasons to explore this aspect of self-care.
They are. And let's not forget about the importance of self-exploration and getting to know your own body.
Right, that's such a crucial part of the journey, understanding your own pleasure and what feels good.
And that increased self-awareness can lead to more confidence, not just in the bedroom, but in other areas of life as well.
I love that. Confidence is key. And speaking of things we need to debunk, let's revisit those myths that keep the taboo alive.
Oh, those myths. They just won't quit.
They're like zombies. They keep coming back.
It's time to put them to rest for good.
For good. Masturbation does not cause blindness.
Yep.
It does not decrease fertility.
In fact, it might even improve it for men.
Right. And it's definitely not just for single people.
That's such an outdated notion.
It's about time we retire those myths once and for all.
I agree. And I think another key takeaway is the importance of open and honest communication.
Yes. Whether it's with your partner, your children, or even just with yourself, those conversations are so important.
They can be challenging at first, but they're worth it.
Absolutely. Creating that safe space for dialogue can really help break down the stigma.
And it can lead to deeper understanding and connection.
And we also touched on the cultural and religious perspectives surrounding masturbation, which I found really interesting.
It's a complex issue with a lot of different viewpoints.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. Everyone's beliefs and experiences are unique, and it's important to approach these conversations with sensitivity and respect.
And while we've highlighted the many benefits, I think it's also crucial to acknowledge that there can be potential downsides if masturbation becomes excessive or compulsive.
You're absolutely right. Moderation is key.
So how do we know if it's becoming a problem?
Well, if it's starting to interfere with your daily life, your relationships, or your responsibilities, that's a sign that it might be time to seek professional help.
And there's no shame in doing so.
None whatsoever. There are amazing therapists out there who can provide support and guidance.
It's all about taking care of yourself, and sometimes that means reaching out for help.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this.
We're all in this together.
And the more we talk about these things openly, the less power those negative messages have.
It's about creating a more accepting and inclusive society.
Absolutely. And that starts with each and every one of us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away from our conversation?
I think the most important takeaway is this: your body is yours to explore, to enjoy, and to care for.
Love that.
Masturbation is a natural part of that journey. It's about pleasure, it's about self-discovery, and it's about taking control of your own well-being.
Beautifully said. It's about reclaiming your sexuality and defining it on your own terms.
Exactly. Don't let outdated beliefs or societal pressures dictate your relationship with your own body.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
And I think it's fitting to end our discussion with a question for our listeners to ponder.
Sounds.
Knowing what we now know about the science of pleasure, the cultural factors at play, and the importance of self-care, how can each of us contribute to a more open and accepting conversation about masturbation?
That's a great question. It's a call to action for all of us.
It is. How can we break down those barriers and create a world where we can talk about these things freely and without shame?
I think it starts with small steps, having those conversations with our friends and family, challenging those negative stereotypes when we encounter them, and supporting organizations that are working to promote sexual health and education.
Those are all great ideas. It's about taking those individual actions and collectively creating a more positive and informed culture.
I truly believe that open dialogue is the key to dismantling stigma and promoting a healthier, more inclusive understanding of sexuality and self-care.
Well said. We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and encouraged you to continue exploring these topics.
And remember, there are resources available if you need support or want to learn more.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Before we go further, just want to pause to give special thanks to our sponsors. Pollock Shaw from RDSP Investments. Thank you for your generous support in making this podcast possible. SoundImax.com, official podcast microphone sponsor. We are grateful to SoundImax.com for the premium Levita microphones, seamlessly connecting to Android and iPhone, requiring no extra apps, and delivering crystal clear audio up to 65 feet. Studio quality sound under $80. Use coupon code PODCAST for an exclusive discount. FireXBlanket.com co-sponsor. Control small home fires quickly with the Fire Blanket, reusable solution under $30. Visit their website and use coupon code PODCAST for a special discount. Thank you to all our sponsors for your incredible support.